Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Adriana Blidaru. I'm the curator of the project Living Content Under Pressure together with Tatiana Moise. And for those who don't know, Living Content Under Pressure is an interdisciplinary curatorial project that conceives itself as a collection of poetic explorations, looking into a potential reconciliation with what it means to be human in the age of a climate crisis. Living Content Under Pressure is composed of an exhibition hosted by Migros Gallery in Bucharest, an online platform created by Wednesday Studio, and public programming that cross-pollinates the project's online and offline environments throughout September and October. And today we'll have a conversation with Monira Al Qadiri. I'll introduce Monira, and the whole conversation should last approximately 40 minutes with time for a couple of questions at the end. And then we'll start the conversation. So Monira Al Qadiri is a Kuwaiti visual artist born in Senegal and educated in Japan. In 2010, she received a Ph.D. in intermedia art from Tokyo University of the Arts, where her research was focused on the aesthetics of sadness in the Middle East, stemming from poetry, music, art, and ritual practices. Her work explores unconventional gender identities, petro-cultures, and their possible futures, as well as the legacies of corruption. Monira has shown internationally in solo and group exhibitions, including Schinkel Pavillon in Berlin, MoMA, New York, Palais de Tokyo, Paris, Migros Museum in Zurich, MoMA PS1 in New York, Haus Der Kunst, Munich, Kunstverein Göttingen, Gasworks in London, Sultan Gallery in Kuwait, Tokyo Wonderside, Tokyo, and many other places. And she currently lives and works in Berlin, and she's here with us today. Thank you, Monira, for joining us and for having this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm gonna share my screen now, so we can talk about your work, about specific artworks from your practice. And okay. And so I wanted to start this conversation with the work that is actually part of the exhibition, Living Content Under Pressure in Bucharest. And the work is Wonder. It consists of a series of natural pearls that have the diameter of approximately 1 centimeter. And that are carved in the shape of oil drill bits. They're usually presented in an aquarium filled with black gravel and aquatic plants. And so I want to talk about this because, well, it is a very layered work, and it highlights so much of your personal history as well as your research, your academic research on the aesthetics of sadness in the Middle East, and this is a topic that has been a long-term influence. I'm just curious, or if you could guide us through these layers of work and how you got to make this piece in the first place.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been kind of a long project I've been working on for, let's say, maybe the past decade. I came back to Kuwait from Japan in 2010, and I really felt completely kind of alienated from my environment because I had changed mentally and physically so much after being in Japan. And I was trying to create connections with the past. Because I felt like my life has kind of mutated because of oil, that I've become some kind of post-oil mutant. And in Japan, I was very much fascinated with this kind of cult of ancestor worship, which is very prevalent in East Asia, which is really like, that your ancestors are kind of living with you at home. There's a shrine to your grandfather and great-grandfather and grandmother, and it's almost like they're there, and there's this very strong belief in ghosts. So I took kind of these ideas back with me to Kuwait, and I really started thinking about my grandfather and what he was doing and how he lived, because he passed away before I was born, and I know nothing about him. And his life was very much the kind of pre-oil life. He was a singer on a pearl diving boat, because pearl diving was the main industry in Kuwait and the Gulf region for, some accounts say, thousands of years, until the advent of oil. And so the whole culture and kind of rituals and music and poetry was all kind of surrounding this cult object of the pearl. So I started to try and create connections between pearls and oil, aesthetically, also using narrative, different methods, techniques. I discovered actually that pearls and oil have the same color scheme. It's called dichroic color, and I started making all of these works around the subject. And then I discovered oil drills. I was so shocked when I first saw one because they were so beautiful, like almost like jewels, because they have like, they're encrusted with like gold and diamonds to be able to dig in the earth better. So they really have this very beautiful jewel-like form. And I was really, yeah, shocked and surprised by it, because as a Kuwaiti, I've never seen that before. And I thought that was strange. Like, why don't we know anything about kind of the inner mechanics of the oil industry that has kind of propped up the whole region for so many years? It's almost like it's kind of concealed from us. So I started creating sculptures out of drills. My first one was actually a public sculpture in Dubai in 2014, which was an oversized 3-meter oil drill coated in iridescent paint and placed next to a pearl diving boat. Actually, it's a fake pearl diving boat in this kind of touristic heritage village. So I really kind of loved that it was placed there, because it felt like a self-portrait. Like, this drill is me and the boat is my grandfather. We're inhabiting the space together, even though I've become such a mutant. I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. And then I really started to be more kind of, I really started researching more about pearls and touching pearls and how to work with pearls. And in this work, actually, I imagined, like, what if a pearl actually mutated into a drill? What would it look like? And I thought that the material of the pearl itself could be used in this kind of political way to show how history has become kind of deformed and almost fictionalized in a way, because we can't experience it the same way anymore. So that the pearl, even though kind of it's sold to us as kind of the marker of our history and like the culture and the beautiful pearl diving music and all of that, we have no connection to it as an object even. So I decided to make this work happen, and it's very difficult to carve pearls or make sculptures out of pearls, because they have a core, and if you carve it, it breaks. But since I lived in Japan, I actually discovered an amazing Japanese jewelry maker who knows how to carve pearls. He's one of the only people in the world who knows how to do this, and he discovered this very specific type of natural pearl that doesn't have a core, that can be carved. And I sent him some pictures of oil drills, and I wrote him a very nice email in Japanese asking, look, is this possible to carve into a pearl? And he didn't answer me. And then 3 months later, a pearl arrived in the post.
Wow.
And it was carved into the shape of a drill, and I was very struck and mystified by this object. And then we started communicating, and he said, I didn't have the confidence to tell you if it was possible or not, so I decided to try it out and see if it worked. So then we made 2 more, but he's very old now and a little bit sick, so we stopped at some point. But the fact that I place it in this aquarium is, I wanted to highlight, obviously, the artificiality of this object. It's not, the pearl as it should be. It's a deformed, mutated pearl. in a landscape where, you know, it should be in the ocean and the sea, but you're seeing it in this very kind of artificial aquarium, which is an artificial seascape, basically, on top of a shell, which is is kind of highlighting it in this kind of very artificial way. And this is what I wanted to do with my work, is that, you know, the ways that we experience history is very is almost impossible sometimes, and we try to recreate it and claim it for ourselves, but at the same time it's distorted and sanitized and strange. So yeah, that's kind of the idea of the work, that I wanted to show this distorted forms of history that are consumed in a new way, and how history shifts and changes through this very small object. Yeah.
Very interesting. And it's very interesting that your family had such a strong connection to, and had basically witnessed this transition between these two industries that have been, you know, the main industries of the region. So that must be a very interesting transition. I can see that in the work so clearly. It's really interesting. I mean, you do often, even in an interview for Living Content that you had with Brian Paul a while ago, you mentioned that this in relation to the extraction of oil in the Middle East, and how your work is really about I quote, a terrible acknowledgement of history, but also about the future, which it makes perfect sense, because your works, especially these drill bits that are these huge sculptures that you make, they look so futuristic. They look as if they're dropped from alien mothership, you know, and it's really interesting. And I was wondering if you have, you know, in your research, if you had if you arrived at this kind of conclusion or understanding of envisioning the future of the Middle East and these areas that are basically surviving almost exclusively from the oil industry, like how would you envision their future if you
I mean, by this kind of the whole body of work is really about this. It's about discovering kind of these objects hundreds of years into the future and looking at them and not knowing what they are. Like, if you really look at these drills that are, you know, taken out of context, you won't know what it is. You really will think it's some kind of, like you said, alien object, octopus, crown. I've had so many people interpret them in different ways. And I think that's what's going to happen in the future. It's going to be, you know, the oil, let's say the oil interval in history is a freak interval, I think. And I don't think it's going to last very long. I think it's going to be very short-lived in the end. And what do we have to kind of commemorate this time by? You know, we never think about that. It's really like what oil has done is really like, it's also, I think of oil as a character, like an alien, really like an alien in a story. The alien spaceship landed, the oil changed everything, and then the spaceship will leave again. What will be left after this kind of legacy? And you know, I also think about the past, because when oil wasn't used as a fuel source, it was used for different things. I mean, it was used as even like like a cure for like cuts and bruises, and even in places like Azerbaijan, people took a bath in it because they thought it was very good for virility and the body and stuff. So there's different ways it was used in the past, and I'm thinking about these ideas in the future. I have a work called Diver, which is a 4-minute video of synchronized swimmers swimming in the sea at night, which makes them look like they're swimming in a black liquid. And the whole idea behind that work is that it's kind of a scene from the future where you know, oil is used as kind of therapeutic medicine, medicinal bath, and people swim in it. So I'm always trying to kind of time travel in my work a lot between this kind of past, present, and future. Just because also, you know, oil itself is a you know, a material that's hundreds of millions of years old. It's made of like plankton and dinosaur remains, and you know, we extract this from the earth and we release energy from it, which is kind of ancient trapped sunlight, basically. It's just a very interesting, you know, connection between time slips, you know, like so yeah, very much trying. I'm always trying to kind of preempt the end of oil in my work and think of it as this kind of tragic character that's going to be leaving us. You know, it's a horrible, destructive material, but it's also been a miracle. You know, it's there's a lot of nuance around it that you can't deny. You know, and as a Kuwaiti, it's, you know, it's part of my life, and you know, not a lot of people acknowledge that, but it's just reality. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it became so abstracted from our existence that we don't even associate it with like what it used to be, like that it actually used to be like living, breathing matter, and now just, you know, a black smudgy thing. And it's really interesting that it became so abstracted, that to the point that everything relies on it, but we don't even know how a drill bit looks. And
Exactly.
you know, it's like, as you said earlier. And this makes me, I mean, you know, you talking about oil in the sense of becoming a character, it really makes me think about, you often aestheticize certain parts of oil, you know, even in its color, or there's certain aspects where it is obviously in your work becoming a character, like this alien, as you were saying. And I'm wondering, like, how do you think that influences the conversation about the environment? Like, what do you think that does to, or how do you think people understand it as a through this anthropomorphization, or of its becoming like its own character in relation to climate change? You said it's a complicated position, but I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like I mean, everybody, like for example, people in Europe and stuff, they feel like it's so far and kind of there's a distance between them and it. Whereas in the Gulf, maybe we're, you know, because we're oil producing countries, it's a different kind of existential crisis in relation to oil. But I mean, people all over the world consume it on a daily basis. It's in everything. It's not just fuel. It's the petrochemical industry. It's plastic. It's in your phone. It's in your clothes. It's in the walls. It's everywhere. It's like really like this alien that's seeped into everything, in a kind of really strangely invisible way. So I mean, I think it's yeah, of course, ecologically speaking, it's a horrible thing that we use because it's very convenient somehow. But at the same time, yeah, I don't know how it's very difficult, I think, for everyone to imagine the world without it. Even though there's so many attempts and trying to do that, and it's funny, it's like an addiction. Like you can't imagine your life without this thing. And it's just funny for me that of course we have to move beyond it, and this is really the message behind my work. But at the same time, it's very difficult to imagine a future where it's not part of our lives. So yeah, I'm always trying to kind of give it a form as a character, because humanizing it somehow makes it weaker than it is. That, you know, if it's a tragic character and it dies in a play, then maybe we can really come to terms with how to kill it. You know? Whereas if you think of it as this supreme being that is, you know, involved in everything we do, it's very difficult to kind of, you know, confront it. So yeah, that's really what I'm trying to do, you know. Yeah.
That's very interesting. yeah, definitely giving it a shape or a form, it makes it easier to imagine, to imagine its limits in a way, or
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think your work, is so much, it's so interesting because it really manages to capture this idea of, deep time through
Mhm.
oil and
Mhm.
skill, and it really manages to also capture like the mystery of it, so it doesn't kind of spoil that surprise. It's
Mhm.
really interesting. And um, I wanted to talk about some of your other works that are
Mhm.
also in relation to this, and maybe you can just give us a little bit of a glimpse, because it's always so interesting to hear how you got to the point of like making them,
Mhm.
and also, for instance, so for instance, Holy Quarter, where you have this a 7 feet projection. Is that
Yes.
correct?
7 meter, yes, 7 meter.
7 meters. Sorry, oops. My Americanized 7 meters projection, and these beautiful glass blown droplets of oil. I would say, now that we're talking about oil. Uh,
Yeah.
a really beautiful work. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that as well, because I feel like here this idea of deep time and scale really comes across beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, this work was kind of like the next frontier. These droplets look like oil, and that was part of kind of the trick that I wanted to play with. But it's actually based on pearls that are found in the desert. And I came across this interesting story about these tiny fragments of these black glass objects that are found in the middle of the empty quarter desert, which is a huge desert in between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, and Yemen. And it's bigger than France, this desert. um, and I was really intrigued by the story, and what pearls in the desert, and pearls are associated with the sea. And then I discovered that there was a mythology around these black beads found in the desert, where people thought that there was an ancient city there buried under the sand, but that people who lived there were too decadent. So God punished them by, striking down the city, and everybody died, and only the pearl necklaces of the ladies remained strewn in the landscape. So I really love this story because also the pearls actually were meteors. They were not from the sea. The whole myth was actually a fabrication because people couldn't explain what these things were. And I thought it was so interesting because, meteors come from outer space, and this kind of pearls from outer space that are black, that look like oil. And it all just came together into this work, all of these subjects. So yeah, it's a film that is about 19 minutes with these pearls in front of it. And as soon as you start watching the film, you start to realize that the pearls are narrating the film as a kind of divine being. So this is also kind of the character that I was speaking about, is this mysterious, divine, kind of godly character that narrates the story of the advent of some kind of other worldly, yeah, person or material or entity that changes everything. So yeah, there is an allegory also towards oil, but it's also about the actual story, and yeah, finding pearls in the desert. So it's a lot of different things. It's a very complex work, I would say. But if you see it, it really gives you if you're there in the room with the sound and the sculptures and the film, you really feel like there's this kind of semi-religious experience, which is something I strive for in all of my works. It doesn't
Yeah.
always succeed, but in this one it did.
I think this is what I was talking about, that mystery in your work, you know, that comes across very beautifully. And I think that it's definitely there, as well as in wonder, you know, which is like such a simple and beautiful gesture to carve a pearl, but it's definitely there. And the whole mystery is just you know, so focused and so compressed in that tiny little pearl, which is really, really nice. But for this work, you actually went there to the desert and you shot the whole footage.
Yes.
And I wish we would have, but I don't. I actually saw excerpts of the movie, and I was, but I haven't. I didn't manage to get like an excerpt from. It was not from a different kind of context for the talk. But I'm curious because your work also uses so much sound, and you work a lot with music, right? And it's also I'm imagining that is probably coming from this legacy of your grandfather's side, I would imagine. I'm just assuming, but tell me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I'd be curious also to know how you see sound at play, and yeah, how you use it in general, who you collaborate with, how you make it.
The sound for the film was actually composed by my sister, Fatima Al Qadiri, who is a very well-known musician. And we've been collaborating ever since we were little kids. And it's just like this crazy telepathic relationship that we have. And, you know, she went kind of more towards music, I went more towards art, but it's still there. And it's so strange that sometimes we're kind of just on the same wavelength, even though we're working on completely different things. So when I started coming up with the project and thinking about it and talking to her about it, and she told me, look, you know, I have this soundtrack that I never, you know, used for anything. And it's really kind of sci-fi. And I think it really works with this project you're working on. And I listened to it and I thought, oh my God, this is like, someone made this for my work. It's like perfect. I mean, it's bizarre how like just putting it on the video and it just happened, you know? And yeah, so I credit, of course, her genius for that soundscape that, you know, I kind of imagined in my head and I cannot make myself, and then she could come up with that. So it's kind of an amazing thing to have someone like that in your family who can, really kind of make the work come alive. Yeah.
And your mother was also an artist, so you also grew up.
Yes.
You both kind of grew up in this very artistic environment as well, right?
Yeah, we basically grew up in her studio. That was just like our life as kids, was just like drawing and painting and experimenting in this studio at home. So it's part of kind of the family story, I would say. I mean, that's why I think my work is very kind of biographical, because it's a lot of artists don't like to kind of acknowledge what happened before and where they started getting kind of their artistic visions from. But for us, it was really like a continuation of someone else's practice, you know, and people before that. So it's very interesting how, you know, the genealogy of these things, continues and evolves with time. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I think that's a really nice way of acknowledging that, and also honoring your past and your family as well. You often also you perform a lot in your works, and you switch very smoothly between mediums, so between like video, I mean, performance, and so I was always curious, like what it's always like a question that I guess appears when artists work with all these mediums, like what came first and how is that transition? And I guess just how do you envision a work, and how do you know what medium is right for the idea that you're working with?
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, that my work is very biographical. I just see everything I do as this kind of self-portrait. and also very animated. I have a background in like being obsessed with cartoons and anime. And no matter what I make, even like sculptures that are fixed objects, but painting them in different ways so they look like they're moving, or everything has this kind of very movement to it, which is something that's, I think, inherent in my practice. But yeah, it's an extension of my body sometimes. I really think my work is all about that. So I guess the body comes first, and then it gets more and more abstracted into these different forms. But it's an extension of my story, and I really use myself as a kind of microcosm for much bigger narratives and concepts. So yeah, that's kind of where it starts. I'm very influenced by a Japanese writer that I used to read as a teenager called Yukio Mishima, who's a very controversial person. But I really was very fascinated by his kind of ideas about like as an artist you have to become your work, or else it's kind of not honest, in a very kind of Japanese Puritan way. So that never left me. It's always like, if I'm not doing something that's an extension of who I am, then it's not correct. I don't know why. Yeah. Yeah.
You play a lot with gender in your work as well. So you've been performing all these like maleness, or like the performative maleness as well. And I wonder maybe if you can talk a little bit about that as well, because it's really interesting how it connects with petro-culture, and that in itself is such a masculine industry, or it is perceived to be as such anyway. And there is even a term for it, petromasculinity, I think it's called, or I'm gonna double check on that, but it is this kind of petro machoism that is around, that formed around like the industry of petroleum in the US. You can see it everywhere. I'm not entirely sure how it is in the Middle East, but I'm imagining that in Kuwait, or it's probably a very similar kind of
yes, totally male dominated.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Kuwait, and Kuwait is an extremely kind of conservative, patriarchal society. So in the true fashion of how I practice my art, I really started to think that men are the best thing that ever happened, and it was a very strange, distorted view of life. And it really started during the war in Kuwait in 1990. That because me and my sisters and my mom were kind of stuck at home, and then my dad was out with the men doing heroic things. And as a 7-year-old, I just linked those things together, and it became this weird obsession with men. And the problem was that I loved men so much, so extremely heterosexual, that I wanted to be them, It's this weird adoration that's very much related to kind of narcissism and power. That I just imagined, in order to be a powerful person in this society, you had to be a man. So I really started cross-dressing a lot when I was younger. And my sister used to take pictures of me when I was like 15 and wearing a beard and like suits and like crazy costumes. And there's even a work about it called Bored 1997. It was just like something that I did. And then obviously I grew out of it, because when I moved to Japan, I realized I have to be more feminine to actually, have a relationship with a man. It didn't work out anymore, but I still go back to it a lot in my work, because it wasn't really, I think, for me about the performance of gender or that, but it was really about the performance of power. So I think that's very much related to what you're talking about, this petro-masculinity, because it's very much related to power. The petroleum industry is so powerful and kind of all-consuming that it's kind of has this, even with my drills, it's kind of this phallic character. It's very masculine, very, in your face. So yeah, I think these things are very much related in terms of like power structures, and how to kind of cosplay this powerful being, Yeah. Yeah.
And shedding a spot, shedding some light on it, does it make it smaller, you think? Is that the intention of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much about these kind of aesthetics of sadness. This is something I really kind of researched and wrote about. I'm really interested in this kind of tragic character because, you know, all of these kind of all powerful beings and empires and corporations are actually very fragile and they can really collapse overnight. The oil industry is no different. I mean, it could collapse like this and then all hell would break loose. But it's, I mean, that has to happen. But it's like that. When you reach a certain status of power, there's only one way to go, which is down. So yeah, by kind of giving these kind of forms and characters to these subjects, I'm trying to kind of make them a tragic character that will, you know, die or collapse soon. Yeah.
And you wrote your thesis
Mhm.
on this, and
Yes.
was this specifically how you started thinking about these issues? Was this what you were thinking in your thesis as well about these, or did it kind of evolve throughout time into
I would,
the?
yeah, I would say it evolved. The thesis was very much about kind of like me missing this kind of melancholy that is very prevalent in the Arab world. And I
Mhm.
didn't know what to call it. And like, I just felt like kind of Western modern science has rendered like sadness as a kind of, you know, a negative emotion, even though in the Arab world it's seen as a very noble emotion. It's, you know, spoken about in literature and poetry since the beginning of time. And I think it's very much related to the climate and the desert itself. So yeah, that was very much kind of that, really kind of digging into the history of this thing and trying to create you know, a confrontation with how we've become obsessed with being this kind of productive human who's happy and prosperous all the time, which is a very also artificial kind of stance and doesn't reflect the full range of human emotions. So yeah, I think this is something that I just, you know, it carries on in all of my works. It's this, yeah, it's this stance of being, you know, always, you know, obsessed with this tragic fallen character in many different ways. Yeah.
Wow, that's really lovely. I love that idea of melancholy coming from the desert. I never really thought about that, but it sounds really, really interesting and really beautiful, and it kind of makes sense in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wow. I think we're coming very close to an ending here, but uh, yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful, for like touring us through the works, and I think that's a great way to kind of end it nicely. Um, if I'm just gonna stop the share screen, and if there are any questions, we can take them now. Otherwise, we can slowly start to wrap up. But thank you so much, Munira. I see we have no questions yet, but I think I've asked you so many questions that we're kind of we did all right. um, so um, I'll just kind of give an ending to our talk, and then we'll say goodbye. So we'll be continuing our public programming next week at 8 p.m. Bucharest time, online on the same platform, a representation by Adrian Gana, another artist from the exhibition Living Content Under Pressure. And he will be talking about his research and thoughts on growing library of digital 3D models documenting nature in a time of climate crisis. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. And thank you so much, Monira, again. And thank you, Tatiana. And Stefania and Roxana of Mobius Gallery, and Ioan Maxim, and our partners who made this project happen, ICERA New York, Goethe Institute, and AFCN Romania. And thank you, Monira, for your patience again, and thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for listening.